Okay, here we are. Welcome, episode number 96. Osprey
96.
Modern Selling. We only have what, four more, Brandon, to the big 100?
Four more to 100. That's a good number.
Yeah. So, and I know we have a big guest coming up on that one as well, right? On our
We do. We have
100
Daniel
coming in.
Disney joining us again for episode 100. He was with us for 50, and we have him for 100.
So I'm Tom Burton. I'm here with one of my co-hosts, Brandon Lee. Carson is on vacation, but we have got two great guests to take Carson's place today. Bob Burg and Jeff West, the co-authors of Streetwise to Saleswise. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to talk.
Can I jump in, Tom, real quick? Because I'm just going to play fanboy. And sorry, Jeff, I don't have the history, but I met Bob. It's probably been close to 15 years ish. When you were speaking at Fresno Pacific University, and I was doing a little adjunct thing there. Well, I had this crazy idea of moving my family to our farm in outside of Fresno, and I heard you talk around the Go Giver then, and it was that, along with How to Win Friends and Influence People, was a big transformation for me, and how I chose and wanted to show up and be more other oriented. Not that I was a complete, self-centered jerk beforehand, but it was that catalyst to get me even further down the road. And so I'm grateful to be on, to have you on our show and for you to spend time with us. So there's my little bit of fanboy love for you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And I remember that engagement at FPU, and they were just such nice, welcoming, warm people. It was just such a delight to be there.
Yeah, very good people. And the warm was actually probably the temperature outside, because that's Central California where it sits, at like 110 to 115 this time of year. But,
Brandon, how long ago was that?
Gotta be.
Oh, gosh, now you're going to make me think. That was at least probably 12 years ago, 12 to 14 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't
So a
feel
little
bad,
experience
Brandon.
here, a little experience under their belts to talk about here.
Don't feel.
What
I've known. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So don't feel bad, Brandon. I've known Bob for 20 years. We've been friends for 20 years. Known his work before that. I do the same now. So don't feel bad.
The fanboy comes out. Awesome. All right, Tom, we'll let you get us on track. Looks like Bob.
No, well, I'm very intrigued to talk about, you both co-authored a book called Streetwise to Saleswise, Become Objection Proof and Beat the Sales Blues. I'm very interested to talk about, well, both of them actually, the objection proof and beating the sales blues. And I know we're going to talk about some of the things that Brandon just brought up, Bob, that you talked about 12, 15 years ago. But let's start. And Bob, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then Jeff will do the same with you.
Basically, I began as a radio and television broadcaster, failed miserably at that, and got into sales. And after 3 months, I was on my way to failing miserably at that, because I had absolutely no idea how to sell, and I'd never had any instruction on how to do it. And apparently the company where I was working didn't have much more, because their advice to me, the training was go out and sell some stuff. And so I floundered for about 3 months. One day I'm in the bookstore looking for something, but this is 40 years ago. So back then, it's not as though there were a whole lot of sales books, and if you didn't know to look for them, you just wouldn't have known. But fortunately, I came across two books. One was by Tom Hopkins, the other by Zig Ziglar. And I thought, wow, there's actually a way to sell. It's more than just knocking on doors and blah, 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 blah about your product. I mean, I didn't know. So I took those books home, and I like to say I didn't read them, I devoured them. And within about 3 weeks, my sales began to go through the roof, and that began a journey for me in sales and personal development. I started reading all the books that are probably in all our bookshelves: the How to Win Friends and Influence People, The Magic of Thinking Big, Psycho-Cybernetics, and the Richest Man in Babylon, and all of Og Mandino's book, all the things that helped me to grow on the inside.
Mm.
so that success could manifest on the outside, right? But I just loved it. I loved it, and eventually worked my way up to sales manager of another company years later, and began to speak on the topic, and have been doing that for quite a while now. And that's that's really it. I like to say my claim to fame is I was a good salesperson, but it's because I learned how to do it, and that was pretty much it. Jeff's story is much more funner than mine.
Yeah, come on, Jeff. Give us something really interesting and compelling.
Yeah, funner is such a great word. Hey, Jeff, before you go, Bob, can I ask you a question? Because this has kind of been a recurring theme, I think, over the last couple of months. Was it doing the inside work and helping you believe in yourself, or the sales skills that had a bigger impact on being more successful in sales? And I know that's a very black and white question.
That's a great question. The sales skills are vitally important, but unless you grow on the inside, those sales skills are going to keep you very, very average, right? It's really learning how to succeed first in your head and then in your heart, right? And from there, that's why I really think success begins on the inside. It manifests itself on the outside. Now, you can have all that great personal development material, but if you don't learn the mechanics of selling and understand human nature and understand, that's going to harm your growth. So I don't think it's an either or, it's an and. At the same time, I think that you're really, what you learn from all the personal development and as you grow as a human being, that allows you to grow outwardly as well.
So do you feel good? Yeah. All right, Jeff, sorry to cut you off there. I had to get that question in.
No worries at all, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having us on. I actually knew I was going into sales from the first grade, so I got a degree to be a band director. That's true. Actually, I have 2 degrees in music, and a bachelor's in music ed and a master's in music composition. And those 2 degrees and a $10 bill will get me a cup of coffee at a good coffee shop. But I ended up in sales by default right out of college. And I look back now and I say it was divine providence. But my wife needed to go to school in an area. There were no teaching jobs open. So I ended up getting a job in sales, and I've stayed in the industry for 45 years now, I guess it is. I started off in the musical instrument industry, had a wonderful mentor there who gave me my first book on sales and personal development. It was How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Betcher. Ended up in the industrial uniform industry, was one of the #1 sales people in the nation with them, and they promoted me and moved me to Texas, where I was their first general manager in the state. A couple of years later, that company got bought out, and I began an insurance career. And that is really where my life began to take off. It was a struggle in the beginning because I was going under financially at the time because of the buyout that had happened. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I had a 20-plus year career with a Fortune 500 insurance company, worked my way up from entry-level sales to being a state sales manager in Texas. And so it's been a lucrative career, and I loved every minute of it. But about 10 years ago, partly because of my friend there, because I knew him so well, I decided that I was going to change directions, and I wrote my first book back then in 2014. And Bob coached me on a speaking career and all that, so I've been doing that since. But it's been an absolute blessing with what I've done. And you were talking about your Bob fanboy moment. I've started, but my career in the insurance industry, I went from being a district manager that would make the numbers one year, miss them the next, not a superstar, but not going to get fired. And then I was given 2 books back in January of 2000 that changed my career. John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and some book that I'd never heard of before by an author I didn't know called Endless Referrals by Bob Burg. Those 2 books changed my life. And so my career just really took off after that. And when I was a regional manager, my administrator buzzed me one day. She says, "You have a phone call?" I said, "Who is it?" She said, "Some guy named Bob Burg." Well, now I had been promoting endless referrals to everybody, speaking to new agent training schools, for 2 years at this point. And I said, sure, it's Bob Burg. I got a buddy on the phone pulling my leg right now. And I get on the phone and he says, hi, Jeff, this is Bob Burg. And I said, sure it is, fella. And he said, excuse me? And it really was Bob. And then I told him how much the book had meant, and we became friends then, and we've stayed friends ever since. So.
Oh, that's
Wow.
awesome.
This is Jeff's first, but I was reaching. I didn't mean to be turning my back
No, you're fine.
on video, but I was.
He was kind of bored, I think, with what you were saying, Jeff,
Yeah.
and he was just kind
Yeah,
of
just
So this is his first book, The Unexpected Tour Guide, which is a beautiful business parable. And that was the one that got him started. But what's interesting, he's now authored and co-authored 3 books. They've all won awards. He's a brilliant writer. But it's interesting because I always say, you know, with Jeff, because Jeff and I can have very long sales conversations. We love sales. We love to sell. We love to buy things from people who love to sell. You know, I mean, we love sales. But Jeff is not only a great teacher of sales, and I hope later on he'll talk about the brilliant concept of fusion points that he developed after he retired, but he's become a student of writing. And I'm telling you, this guy can reel the story like you can't imagine. So
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Bob. And good job, Jeff. I mean, if Bob's talking about your writing skills, there's something there.
Well, thank you. He's a good friend and very kind, and I do work very hard at getting better all the time.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna drill into some of these questions. First of all, I want to welcome our friend Bob. Welcome, aloha from Bob.
Aloha.
And Butch is excited to see that we have 2 guys with gray hair.
Oh yeah.
They must know what you're talking about. I have no hair, which means I really know what I'm talking about. And Brandon, yeah, you're getting there, so you know you're kind of a little bit there as well.
Brandon's
so now the pressure is on. So let's start by talking a little bit about the book that you co-authored, The Streetwise to Saleswise. And I want to talk first, or let's jump in first about this objection proof. And you know, one of the things you say is it's no longer, objections are no longer anything you need to be fearing or be worried or concerned about. I think that's something that a lot of salespeople, we're always worried about an objection or something that's going to get in the way. Tell us a little bit more what you mean by that, unpack that a bit, and how does that fit into the streetwise to saleswise approach?
Well, you know, objections have always been the bane of the salesperson's existence, right? The objections would get in the way of the sale taking place. And when you think about it logically, you wouldn't think that would be the case because, you know, once a person has any kind of training in sales, perhaps with the company that they're starting with, and most companies have a sales training program, you know what the objections are going to be. Probably within 3 sales conversations, you know what all the objections are, or most of them. Every so often something's going to slip. You know most of them. So you think, okay, I know the objections. The people at my company can teach me how to work with them and what the answers are. So the person has an objection. I know the answer. I'll answer it. They'll buy. Fantastic. And yet it doesn't happen that way. And so objections remain a sticking point for that person. And then they start fearing the objections. And as we know, what we fear most is what is going to transpire because we're putting out that energy for it. And we start trying to avoid it. And it doesn't matter because those objections are still there. So this happens. So there's a couple issues with what we're generally taught, and that is to overcome objections. You've got to overcome objections in order to do well in sales. There's a challenge with that, and that is you cannot overcome an objection. I can't, you can't, no one can overcome an objection. Why? Well, the answer is with the word overcome. Is there any prospective customer or client who wants to be overcome by their salesperson, to be told you're wrong? No, just listen to me. And I've never had a prospect respond by saying, thank you for pointing out the error of my ways. It just doesn't happen. Overcome comes from the same Latin root of convince, convincere, and convincere meant to conquer. Okay. No one wants to have their objections conquered. So that's the first part. So we're handling the objection from a kind of a false frame, an unproductive frame. The second part is often they give you an objection that isn't necessarily the true objection. It's merely the manifestation of the actual objection. I don't mean they're lying. And if they are, that's a whole different issue. That's a trust issue. You're not even in the game at that point. Now I'm talking about when there's interest, but they don't quite know exactly what the problem is, but there's something there. Now remember, as salespeople, we know the process. We're in sales conversations every day, right? So to us, all of that is natural, but to them, it might be the one time in their life, or once a year, or once every 10 years, whatever, depending upon what we sell. So they don't know exactly what the problem is. They don't want to appear ignorant by asking the wrong question. They're a little defensive about it. They don't know exactly what the issue is, but it's sort of like in the old Spider-Man cartoon. Remember, he had spidey sense. He didn't know exactly what the problem was out there, but he could sense there was something. So when the prospect does this, but they don't really know what the issue is, they just reflexively say something like, it's too expensive, or I got to think about it, or I need to talk to my neighbors, cousins, whatever, who once did something like this and bought something like this and knows about or something else. Okay. So what happens is, if we're just answering the objection that was given with a carefully rehearsed response, we could be providing the perfect, smoothest response to the wrong objection. Okay. And so what we want to do is we don't want to try to overcome the objection. What we want to do is instead work effectively within the actual objection, get to the root of the objection, and then in partnership with our prospect, determine how to work through it in a way that serves them best.
So let me see if I want to unpack a little bit, Bob, some great stuff there. What I'm hearing you say is a lot of time the objection isn't an objection. It may be an excuse. It may be something to buy some time. It may be whatever. It's not likely the objection that is there. In fact, you hear this all the time, right? Price or money or time or whatever is not really the objection. So I assume then what you want to then do is start asking questions and getting more data that determine the objection behind the objection, if you will, right? Or maybe the objection behind the objection, multiple layers. Is it that onion peeling exercise that really ultimately gets you to that point?
And it begins, and I'm going to have Jeff handle this one, and that is, it begins with mastering ourselves. Jeff?
Bob has had the becoming objection-proof process as something he's been teaching for a long time. It's never been put into a book format. And so when he reached out to me about us doing a book together, I said, "Oh yes," very fast. And we'll tell you that story if there's time later. But it basically, his principle, not only is it effective, but it also, instead of creating a debate between you and a prospect, it actually builds a relationship, and you come out of the whole objection closer with the prospect, and they feel that as well. But basically, the step-by-step process is, of course, number one, controlling your own emotions. Because when you get an objection in sales, it sets up something I call a collision point, which is basically the combination of how your body reacts with a negative emotion combining with logic. When your brain generates that negative emotion because you've got an objection, "Oh no, I got to make a sale, I've got to do this," it sends a somatic marker down into your body, makes you feel uncomfortable. Everything gets kind of crazy. If you don't control your own emotions first, your responses aren't going to be responses, they're going to be reactions. And you'll start into a debate with your client or with your prospect. Nobody's going to win that debate. As I always say, never try to overcome an objection, just like Bob said, because an objection's like an opinion. And you don't need to look much further than our political world to know people don't like it when you argue with their opinion about anything. So the first thing is controlling your emotions, but then empathize. Let them know you consider their thought process valid. Say, I can see how that would be something you would want to consider. Now, don't agree with them, but at least let them know you hear them and that it's a valid The fact they're thinking that is not a bad thing. But then ask questions, just like you just said, Tom. Ask questions so that you can dig a little deeper because you want to understand their perspective. Because you can't help them see it differently if you don't really understand how they see it now. So when you ask questions to get their perspective, and you say, do you mind sharing with me a little bit more? I really want to make sure I understand what you're saying with that. It does two things. Number one, it lets them know how much you value their opinion, but it also gets them thinking through the process. And once they've been able to kind of verbalize it more and go with that, then because you have given it validity, you've empathized with them that this is an important thing. It's very easy to say, I certainly understand how you feel about that. And, and I may or may not be the right fit for you because of that. I understand that. But if you don't mind, let me kind of shift your perspective just a little bit. Let me shift your frame. And then you offer your solutions. What you'll find out is because the two of you will be finding the solution for them together. Like I say, not only does it make them comfortable moving forward, it creates what I call a fusion point, which is my branding on my sales training and all that. But it causes a fusion point and it makes them feel comfortable with you. It makes them feel a kindred spirit with you, and they give you mental permission to shift their frame and to work through that objection.
Yeah, that's so good. What I like about that is it's a process. It's systematic. I mean, I heard you say empathize, clarify, ask some questions.
Right.
And in the process of that, what you're really doing is establishing yourself as that trusted advisor. So we don't have to go fight for it. We earn it by the process that we walk them through. I know early in my sales career, probably later than it should have been because I'm a slow learner, but I would catch myself when there were objections or they were saying things, I would catch myself going like ready to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And I was totally communicating to them, shut up, I'm going to answer and solve that problem. And I didn't realize for so long how much just that anticipatory look and bottled up energy killed my sales success.
I think when we start in sales, most of us do that. I know I did as well. It's natural because you're so excited about what you're doing. You just know that you can help them. So if they would just be quiet and listen, and of course, when we talk about human nature, that's not the way it works.
Well, I think as Bob pointed out here, right, sellers often get the objection sweats, and get anxious. What I'm hearing you say, though, is objections are opportunities. And if you take the mindset of the fact that they give you that, use that as an opportunity to build the relationship, not as oh my God, as something to get super anxious about.
No, if you handle it correctly, it's actually absolutely, it can create, as Jeff says, a fusion point with that person. We're big believers too that you answer objection. The best time to answer an objection is before it ever comes up. There are certain objections that are absolutely baked into your product or service. Okay. And these objections are going to come up every time. Now, I know there are people who say, well, no, never bring up an objection that they don't bring up first. You're putting that in their mind. No, it's already in their mind. And the most dangerous objection is the one that's never brought up in the first place by them or by you. Okay. So if you bring up the objection first, it's a question that you can answer and provide information. Okay. If they bring up the objection, it's an objection. That's a totally different frame. And as Jeff and I talk about in Streetwise to Saleswise, the frame is probably the most important element or among the most important elements because the frame is the foundation from which everything else evolves. So if you set the proper frame, you're 80%, 90% of the way toward the results you want. On the other hand, if you buy into their negatively set frame, which is probably set unconsciously, they're not even thinking about it, and you buy into it, you're 80 to 90% the other way. So the best with an objection is when you bring it up first, all you're doing is now you're providing information. And that's the frame you want to be working from. Now you're an educator.
That's a really interesting Brandon, this is even interesting in some of the stuff that, we do with Fist Bump and with the clients you work with it. Fist Bump is almost getting them to list out the potential objections that they're going to run into with their customers, and not only just use them in sales, but even in your marketing and your communications and your thought leadership. All of that can be headed off and make the objection your friend versus the enemy.
Well, if you handle it during the sales conversation itself, you talk about that point along with the solution, it's education. If they do it after the fact, it's an objection, and you have to do the two things differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
I like that. And to Tom's point, like we do work with our customers about bringing those as part of their 3 topics that we talk about for their social content and bringing in their humanity. Some of that is, hey, let's bring in those objections, especially we're doing things like when you have a really good call that you've recorded and there's a conversation around the objections, we want those transcripts to use for creating articles, creating social content, and getting it out there, because we want to show and demonstrate, hey, we're not scared of the objections. In fact, we want to have a conversation with you. And so we start those conversations by putting it into the social content.
Once you've done that and you've walked through that process, you've talked about those particular objections you get commonly up front, and then you have your sales conversation, and they do bring up something else. When you walk through the process that we teach in the book, when you finally get to the very end stage where you're isolating, is there anything else that would be an issue that we need to deal with? And they'll say no. It's very easy to walk them comfortably into doing business with you. My favorite way to do that was always, do you see any reason we wouldn't want to move forward at this point? They would say, well, no. People love to say no to salespeople. I made that my yes. So.
That's really good. Well, I've got to address Chris Dunn with his Bob Burg fanboy comment. Hey, Chris, you're behind Jeff and behind me, so there's 2 of us already in line. So you're 3rd in line today, my friend.
Chris is a friend of mine on LinkedIn. We've known each other for quite a while. Great guy.
Chris is a great guy. Yeah.
And I want to touch on just, I think Anthony summed things up here, right? As we talk, objections are a good thing. Don't shy away from them and get ahead of them if you see them prior. And I think really spending time, in a sales and marketing area, understanding those objections and not being afraid of them and embracing them. I mean, there isn't a product or service in the world that doesn't have some objection or consideration built into them for a customer. Yeah. So, if it was, it would be too easy.
Yeah, well, that's true. And if it was too easy, there'd be no financial value in being a salesman.
Right.
So, no, that's very true. It makes a great point, and especially about getting ahead of them. Sure, why not? And one of the best ways to do this is through your discovery. And Jeff and I are big believers that the discovery element of the sales conversation is extremely important, because this is where you, literally discover what they need, what they want, what they desire, what problems or challenges they are having that they want to be helped with, what is going to move them closer to happiness. And the more of a positive discovery you do, the more intense a discovery, if I may, that you do, the more you're going to be able to then add insights very specific to their situation that's going to maybe point out weaknesses they don't know they even have that you can help them to mitigate, or identify opportunities they have that you can help them to leverage. So the better in fact, we would say that before you even go connecting with the benefits of your product or service with their needs, wants, and desires, you need to first know what those needs, wants, and desires are. And you really need to know. If you do this correctly, not only do you diminish the number of objections that you will have, okay, by the time you ask them to take action, by the time you ask for the order, you're simply now asking them to act on something they've already told you they want to do.
Right. If you ask the right questions and you know what their value proposition is. And that's a value proposition is one of those things that I say companies, even though they're well intended, sometimes they'll miss the mark slightly, because the value proposition has absolutely nothing to do with your product or your service, has nothing to do with your company, has nothing to do with how great the salesperson is. And we know everybody who follows you guys are great. It has everything to do with how their life gets better if they become your client. So it's really their value from your proposition. So when you ask questions during your discovery that's focused on that, and you plan this out ahead of time, they will tell you everything that you wanted to tell them anyway. But you ask the questions, so it came out of their mouth instead of yours, which gives it so much more credibility in their eyes.
So, hey, I want to bring up a question or a comment here from Bob, and I want to get your guys' take on this. Bob is saying, do not oversell, though, by digging up too many unmentioned objections. Only raise objections that relate to their specific needs and wants. What's your thought on that? And is there a balance, or is there a place where you go too far, where you end up kind of digging a ditch for yourself in this area, especially in the discovery?
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Now, go ahead, Bob. Sorry.
No, remember, we're talking about bringing up objections that are already baked in to your product or service. So no, you're certainly not fishing for all sorts of objections to be brought up. These are only ones that either you're going to be asked, or even more dangerously, that you're not going to be asked, but are on that person's mind. So we would go back to only bring up those objections that are baked in to your product or service.
And Bob, we talked, Jeff, you talked about one with dealing with objections, being empathetic and kind of clarify and then ask questions. It's my summary of it. But I've also heard a lot of folks talk about using stories to answer objections. What are your thoughts on some of those different or best practices other than the one that you already shared, Jeff?
Jeff's the master storyteller.
Well, the reason that stories are so important in every part of your process, including if you're working through an objection, is pretty simple. It's the way our brain works. You know, one of the things that has just puzzled me and other sales leaders for decades is how you could take two different salespeople, put them side by side. They look like they should both be very successful. One decides to go out and become successful. The other one decides to quit. And so it's the process of how the brain works. I call that fusion points. And I know we don't have a lot of time on here today, but basically when you do something, when you generate an emotion in the brain, our body sends a somatic marker down and it changes the way we feel. When we talked about an objection makes you have that negative feeling, so your blood pressure can go up, your breath gets slow. So when that combines with logic, which is how any decision gets made, it produces a negative reaction. But the other side of the equation works well. If your brain generates a positive emotion, and then when the decision is getting made, the emotional part and the logical part communicate, they produce the decision. When you do that, the somatic marker that happens inside them makes them feel comfortable saying yes. They feel at ease. They feel part of what's going on. So it makes them feel differently. And when you use stories in your sales process, it does exactly the same thing. It generates a positive emotional response in their brain. Either you're going to be a solution to a problem they know they have, or you're going to be helping them with something they didn't even realize was going to be so great. When it combines with the logic of the value proposition that you're bringing, then it creates a fusion point and they move forward in the process. It's why I write parables. I can write the basic how-to sales book. I've done that, but my favorite genre to do this is a business parable. That's what Streetwise is. It's what all the books that I've written that I've published are. And it's because it links the material in the reader's mind in a better way for them to retain it and use it when they walk out rather than just normal note-taking.
And Jeff, I love that, and I try to incorporate that in telling stories. Even with I learned it as word pictures in counseling when I realized I sucked at being married, and my wife and I went back to marriage counseling 3 months after we were married. And I've tried using those with our kids, with each other. How are some of the best ways to incorporate story into handling objections?
When you're handling an objection, the way I would incorporate the stories, again, you go through the process we've talked about. But then when you're doing the reframe when you're getting to the point where you're changing the frame and you're going to make your suggestion. Do it in story format. Tell what that solution is, but then use your story along with your social proof to let your prospect get the understanding through an actual real life scenario about how this solved the issue. And that's the point that you'd want to put that in.
Bob, were you going to add to that?
No, but I saw Butch's point about the buyer will tell you why they will buy if the seller gives them the space to do so. And Jeff, and we put this in the book, but Jeff, tell that great saying you have about the buyer will tell you what.
Oh yeah,
What's out to sell.
In a sales process, the unfortunate truth that we all have to accept in sales is unless they already know you, like you, and trust you, the fact that we are in sales doesn't automatically give us the most credibility in their mind. And so you could tell them all the great things about your product, the great things about your service. You could do everything right and everything you say be exactly correct and solve their needs, but it came out of your mouth. Thus, it's suspect. But if you ask the right questions, you can lead them through a discussion and ask the right questions where they will say all of those great things, and then it comes out of their mouth instead of yours. And so instead of it being suspect, it's the gospel truth. I used to do that when I was in the employee benefits arena. I would ask the questions about the different things that they were doing, but I would always ask this one question. A lot of companies these days make a difficult budget choice and they choose no longer to offer employee benefits or cut them back. Why do you still go to the expense and effort? And they would tell me, well, I'm trying to attract great employees. I really want to take great care of my people. I want to keep them here once I get them. I don't want to have to retrain new people. They would go all through the things that every other salesperson in our industry was trying to tell them, but they would tell me, and then I would just look at them and say, you know what? That is amazing. You just told me there's some things you're trying to do that we can help you do. And then I'll walk them through the solutions that we offer.
Yeah, they told themselves what they needed to hear instead of Jeff telling them what they needed to hear. And that makes
you just set the table for them to do that is what you did.
Absolutely. It was my job to find out what they need and help them get it. Salespeople, we're professional matchmakers, guys. We have, on one hand, we have a client or a prospect that has a legitimate need that we know we can help with. We have a company on the other side, or ourselves if you're self-employed, but a company on the other side of the equation that has the right solution, and we make the match happen, and we get compensated for making that happen. We're professional matchmakers is what it amounts to.
So I have a question, and if this takes too long, then we'll save it for another episode. But a lot of people, right, in sales, one of the biggest challenges is getting that appointment or getting that initial conversation that's there. And obviously there's a lot of objections, Brandon, I know you hear this all the time about getting that first meeting. Oh, I don't want to get on a meeting and get sold. Oh, I'm going to get pressured. I'm going to get all of those things. Is there a way to use some of this objection strategy earlier in the sales process to actually open the door to potentially get some conversations? They may not be sales meetings or pitches or whatever, but building relationships and getting some initial conversations going.
Well, what we teach in the book, this has been such a wonderful collaboration for Bob and I, because we've taken a lot of Bob's sales training, we've taken a lot of mine, and we've combined them and then did it in story format. But the concept I briefly mentioned earlier about fusion points, our goal is to create fusion points with anybody that we're talking to, whether it's a prospect or a client or whatever. But when we do our thing that we do in Florida, I actually teach a component of it that's how do you create fusion points before you even meet the client. The truth is, if you understand how the neurology of the brain works in making a decision, it's really valuable information to have, because then you can actually, if you work with the science instead of in opposition to it, you can influence how the prospect you've never met makes the decision to give you the first meeting. You can influence how that same prospect then decides to become your client and your eventual personal walking ambassador. And if you're recruiting for a sales team, if you're leading a team, you can actually influence how that potential recruit makes the decision to come on board with you and then move forward and have a great career. And that science about connecting the positive emotional responses with the logic. That's how the decisions get made. In a prospecting concept, you generally, any prospect is going to fall normally into one of three categories. You got the first category that they already know they have a need. Maybe they recognize your company name or your brand. So when you make that contact, you're creating a fusion point for them. They see a solution maybe there. Don't you wish they were all that way? You get the
Yeah.
appointments, they say yes, everything's wonderful. But you got these other two groups. One, the second group, they consider an unexpected sales call an interruption to their day. It
Mhm.
creates a collision point for them, a negative response combined with logic. You don't get anywhere with those. And then you've got a third group that they're really not thinking about you at all. There's no emotional context, there's no scientific, they're thinking about their day because you haven't given them a reason to think about you yet. So what we teach when we're doing that is we talk about there's three ways that you can create a fusion point with a prospect that you've never met. Number one is by getting an introduction from someone else that they already know, like, and trust. They may not know you, but they know, like, and trust that person. And when they say you're a great person, it creates the fusion point. The second is in whatever marketing strategy you're using, you want to create three positive emotional touches where you're providing value to that prospect before you ever ask for the first meeting. I love the term you used before as we were in the green room about people that throw the pitch out there immediately. You don't want to do that. Provide value. And it depends on your industry and your product. I'll teach things like sending them positive press that you've seen about their company or about them individually. You might find something on social media that they love and you send that. Just a little research, and over about a 1 week period, you can actually touch them 3 times just doing that. Or you can send out a card to them, things of that nature. And then the third thing is that in the verbiage that you use, you want to make sure that you're really focused on their value proposition, which is what I talked about earlier. You want to focus on their value from your proposition. You don't want to focus on any other thing other than you want to help them get that value. And when I was in the business to business and employee benefit arena, the administrative assistant, people would call them gatekeepers. I call them key holders because when I did what I did, they helped me get access to the kingdom. But if that administrator, I didn't talk about the company name and how great we were. And I really wanted to meet the owner of the company. I said, I don't know if we're going to be the right fit for your company, but if we are, if you're missing work due to an accident or an illness, or maybe you're caring for a seriously ill spouse or child, we're actually providing money for you so that you don't lose your financial footing during that time. And it may not mean anything to you. And they would always say, it does too. And they would help me meet the owner of the company because I was focused on their value from my proposition.
Mm.
You kind of dissolve the objection before they happen, essentially through the process. They're great things.
Hey, Bob, I've got a question, kind of a follow-up to that is, what role do you see? We already established we all have gray hair, some of us more hair and less hair than others, but how do you see social and tools like LinkedIn and content helping in this process?
So it's really interesting because when social media really began to be a thing, one of the questions, because people know me for it, and I first wrote this in my book, Endless Referrals, back in the mid-90s, and that was my basic quote was, all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. In other words, the importance of building that relationship. And so when social media really began to be a thing, people said, well, can people still build relationships without being face to face? And I said, it's interesting because when I first started in sales 40 years ago, we also used technology to create these relationships. It was a strange thing. It was called the telephone. And, I was building relationships with people and closing sales and doing all those things and receiving referrals, all those things through a telephone. Okay. And so social media and the internet provides us so many wonderful opportunities to meet people we may never have otherwise had the opportunity to meet. The key is understanding that all things being equal, people don't do business with and refer business to those social media platforms they know, like, and trust. It's the person in front of the computer. Okay. And that's one of the reasons I love your service so much, is because you allow that relationship, you help facilitate that relationship to begin. Okay. But when everything we post or I was going to say tweet, I guess would be now X or whatever, or put on LinkedIn or repost or comment. I like to say, before everything you're about to do, before you hit send, simply ask yourself, does this add value to the people or the person who are going to see this? Right? Because that's still always what it's all about. One of the things I used to say when I spoke at sales conferences, I'd begin by saying, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet. Right? They're not going to buy from you because you need the money. They're not going to buy from you just because you're a nice human being. They're going to buy from you. They're going to do business with you because they believe that they will ultimately be better off by doing so than by not doing so. So in everything you do in building that relationship, ask, how are you adding value to? Now, let me answer Bob's question. Bob Britton, he said, here's where I diverge. We can't provide value, he says. Value is defined by the client, not the selling company. So here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to agree with him totally and tell him we don't diverge at all. Value is defined by me, I guess, but I'm sure by a lot of other people. Value is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, what have you, that brings so much worth or value to them that they will willingly exchange their money for it? In other words, what I'm saying, and what I think Bob is saying, is value is always in the eyes of the beholder. Okay, that's why the discovery is so very important, because as human beings, we all come from our own set of beliefs. We value different things differently, okay, according to ourselves. But as human beings, we tend to believe that everybody sees the world basically the same way we see the world, but they don't.
Oh.
So the biggest mistake a salesperson can ever make is believing that they're providing value to someone because they would find it to be of value, when it's not necessarily true that the other person would be. So yes, we do. I believe we can provide great value to others, but first we have to know what it is they value, not what we value.
Yeah. And I think that brings us. I'm sorry, Bob.
No,
yeah, I think you answered it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you said in answer brings us all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning. And we framed it under of answering objections or addressing objections, but it's still that same process of empathize, gain some clarity, ask questions, and then you can align yourself where you're not diverging from them, but you're very much aligned with them.
Yeah.
And that's part of the value you bring to the table. But the value that makes a customer choose you in a crowded market when other people are offering the same thing isn't always anything to do about your company. It's the things that you bring to the table that are above and beyond the transaction.
Yeah. And that's where I've become such a big believer around social and the opportunity of it as a medium to get a lot of that communication out there and establish or lay foundation for being known, liked, and trusted before they ever even meet us.
Absolutely.
Well, remember, if you can't distinguish yourself, okay, if that prospective customer or client doesn't see anything different about you than they do in anyone else, it's always going to come down to who has the lowest price.
Right.
And when you sell on low price, you're a commodity. When you sell on high value, you're a resource. So it's all those things you do that the outside the intrinsic value of your product or service, right? It's all the elements of value that you provide. Jeff and I are big fans of a guy named Richard Wildman. He wrote a book called 100 Proven Ways to Acquire and Keep Clients for Life. It's absolutely brilliant. And what he has, and he's, basically his client list is like the Fortune 100 company, right? So and the way he has been able to, and utilizing empathy, utilizing genuine care, he's figured out how to, and he's documented in here how to provide experiences to people so that they feel so good about themselves. And of course, when they feel good about themselves, they feel good about you, and they feel good about the situation. And it's those things we can do that bring value to people, again, over and above the intrinsic value of your product or service. And again, I think your service really allows people to do that because they allow them to bring themselves to the table in a way that often is difficult to do.
Yeah, appreciate that summary of it. And before we go, I want to let Jeff and Bob let everyone know about where they can find information about SalesWise Live and all that. But we got to throw Luke's comment up there, Tom. Best advice he's gotten all summer is from Jeff. So Jeff, you got your fanboys here as well, besides Bob being your fanboy. I know you got Luke in there.
Thank you, Luke.
Jeff's and at the last SalesWise Live conference, people said they came because they kind of knew about, the Go-Giver, and they want to see and so forth. And they came away with information from Jeff on how to build their business that was just, exceptional. This guy is really good. There's a reason why he led thousands and thousands of people in a Fortune 500 company that, is very well known, and he set records, and, that doesn't happen by chance.
Okay, audience, I want you to pause for a second. Did you realize how Bob just sold with a story?
Yeah, and a referral.
Giving praise
yeah.
and referral about Jeff.
Yeah.
Like he just demonstrated for us everything that we need to know.
Now they can know me like they trust me.
I have a bunch of objections, but we'll handle those later.
Nice.
You mentioned the event in Florida. We do an event in Florida. We've got the next one's coming up in September. It's called SalesWise Live, and it's Bob, myself, and our partner Kim Angeli. And it's a 2-day game changer because it's not the thing where, they get to see people who write books and speak about sales up on a stage. We're in the mix the entire time. We treat them to a dinner on Sunday night, and then we teach solid Monday and Tuesday. We get in the crowd, we get in there, and we equip them with what we do. And we do it at the most remarkable place in West Palm Beach, Florida, called the Ben. It is just it's an experience all in of itself. Bob, I'll let you finish up on that, but it's just a wonderful event.
Yeah, and we actually have Richard Wildman, who's going to be, again, one of our heroes. And this was kind of a story in itself, only because Richard is so booked all over the world. I think he has something like 5 days open in August where he's not speaking somewhere over the world, and we were able to get him for this date in September, and it was like, we're really cool about it when we're talking to him, and then we get off the thing, and Jeff and Kim and I are going, this is
That's awesome. Well, where can people go for learning about SalesWise Live, and then where's the best place for them to find your book, and lastly, where's the best place for them to connect with either or both of you if somebody is interested?
Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say, I put in the private chat because I'm not sure I can put it in the main one. So I put in the private chat the saleswiselive.com link if you want to put it up there.
Yeah, we'll put it in the notes as well.
We'll put it in
Maybe
the notes,
Chris,
yeah.
Right.
I bet Chris is still on there. Chris, could you grab that or add saleswiselive.com into the comments? That'd be great. And we'll put it in the show notes. So it's on the podcast. We'll add it on the YouTube channel as well, so everybody can find it. But that's saleswiselive.com.
And then Jeff at his site, jeffcwest.com. He does a thing about 3 or 4 times a week where he talks about his brilliant fusion points and how to utilize that in building your sales career, and as a leader, how to use those fusion points in order to encourage and help those you lead. Then at my site, Burg, BURG.com, I have a daily impact email that I send out every morning if people would like to look into that.
I have it with my coffee every day.
There you go. Well, gentlemen, this has been, I had high expectations for today. And I mean, for me, you surpassed them. Those fusion points the process of overcoming objections, adding in story, Bob demonstrating how to add the story in there at the end. This was excellent for me. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, totally agree. I think we need to get you guys back for another encore presentation. I have just barely scratched the list of questions that we wanted to hit today. So
maybe we get you guys back like a month before your next quarter sales wise, because I can't attend this quarter. I promised my daughter we'd be at Disney during that time. And I think if I said I'm going to go down the street in Florida for a few days, I'd get in trouble.
Well, maybe she'd prefer to go there, Brandon, instead of Disney.
You know, she's already learning. She's 11 and she sells really, really well, very naturally. But maybe a month before the next one, we could bring you in, and I'm hoping I can keep it on my calendar to attend next quarter.
Tell your daughter if she comes to the event instead of going to Disney World next year, you'll be taking her to Europe.
Or maybe she should come to the event instead of you, Brandon, and you can go there.
I like that idea, actually.
Yeah. See how that goes. Let us know how that goes, Brandon.
Well,
all right.
If I send Zoe to there, Zoe would have a multi-million-dollar company in 6 months, and then she could take me to Europe next year.
That's right.
That's the point. Yes, that's the point.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, Jeff and Bob. Good luck with the show and the upcoming SalesWise Live. Yeah, I'm going to see, Brandon, maybe I can work my way down there the next one as well. So
there you go.
That would be great. And thanks for all the comments, some great comments today. So thank you, everybody who participated. Yeah. And Brandon, do you want to take us home?
And man, I'm not Carson, but yeah, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for another awesome episode of Mastering Modern Selling. We will see you next week, same time, same place, or podcast 24 hours a day. And until next time.